Okay, look, thank you for the introduction. And in terms of my presentation this morning, what I want to really do is just share with you some observations and learnings that I've had in my career over the last 20 odd years, and share some sort of specific examples in terms of the designing, the construction and the operation of large-scale caving mines. Really sort of to give some more detail to what Farron just walked you through. So just for context, when we talk about a caving method, if we look at the bottom left-hand figure here, we can see a typical section through a cave. And you got your bottom extraction level at the bottom, you've got broken caved ore moving upwards, and then you've got the solid rock, which progresses all the way up to surface. And what you see in here is this sort of the mechanisms that are working within a normal cave. Now, to link it to something which perhaps we're all more familiar with on surface, looking at the top right-hand corner, you'll see a figure of a SAG mill, which, as a lot of people know, is a large mill and a processing plant that grinds up ore. Now, essentially a cave, a block cave or a panel cave underground does essentially the same thing as that SAG mill, which Farron talked about earlier, where the rock, as it's falling down through the cave, breaks itself up as it's moving, which is the same thing that happens within a SAG mill. However, it's a little more complex within the cave, because we have, if we look at the figure in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see the typical mechanisms of flow that are involved in a cave. And this is where it gets quite complex, because all these little arrows and paths indicate the sort of potential flow mechanisms that can be at play in a cave. And this is what we have to manage. And this figure here is illustrating something that we use in terms of some of the software to plan and schedule out the mechanics of a cave. So quite complex in terms. So caving itself is, I think we'd regard it as quite a journey, and it can be a long journey in a number of instances. There's a recent large caving complex which is just starting to come online and initially producing, which they started development of nearly 20 years ago. So that's how long it took to get all the initial development, the access development in through to the cave development and begin to start production. And this is illustrated here in the figures, which I'll just walk you through. So I'm starting on the left-hand side and moving to the right. We see the first phase of starting a cave is the cave establishment. So the cave establishment really involves initially putting in a lot of development. And as we see for the larger caves around the world these days, there's typically at least 200 odd kilometers of tunneling that has to go in to support that. So that takes a lot of time and obviously a lot of money, and we have to do that that's the very first phase of establishing a cave, such that we can start initiating it, which is where we sort of get into the cave propagation. So to initiate the cave, the way I explain it is it's sort of like if you imagine you've got a table with a lot of weight on it and a lot of legs underneath it. When we initiate a cave, we initially start pulling out the legs underneath the table, such that the weight on the tabletop sort of, is not supported by enough legs, and it starts to collapse. And this is what we see illustrated in the second figure here, where that collapse commences and then it starts to move its way up to surface. Eventually, because all caves are underground and below the surface level, a cave, because it collapses, will eventually reach surface and it will intersect surface, and we get what's called a subsidence zone. And that's really when a cave starts to mature. If we move to the far right-hand side, we can see the difference between the previous figures. It's got a bit larger, so the cave is, if we're operating it correctly, is pulled out to the full volume. And again, we can see we've got some sort of surface substance crater zone on top. So a long journey, as I said, up to 20 years in some stages. So one of the key things when we talk about caving compared to other mining methods, particularly on surface and underground, is caving is very much rules-based. And if I compare it to your typical surface mine or your smaller scale underground mine, the stoping that Farron talked about earlier, what's different there is if you run into problems, you can stop mining in a difficult place and you can go and find somewhere else that's easier to mine. There may be a production interruption, but you've got alternatives where you can go and source production from. The difference in a caving operation is that once you establish that footprint down the bottom, you're locked into that and you effectively remove optionality. And this is where it becomes important to adhere to the rules that we need to work through in terms of designing, building and operating a cave. We can see on the list of bullets there, those are the sort of things that we have rules for. Within the caving community, each operation has rules against the design issues through to development, because we're doing multiple levels and they'll have to be linked so that everything is appropriately scheduled and finished in the time that it should be. Through the cave initiation, where things like the method and the way that we pull the rock out from the draw points initially is very important to make sure that we correctly establish a cave. And then through to cave operation, where essentially we want the broken rock to evenly draw down across the whole cave volume. We don't want uneven draw, because that may disrupt the planned flow of rock, and we could get negative things coming in like dilution if we're not careful. So even when we're in operation, we still have to follow a number of rules to make sure that we have a sustainable and cost-effective cave. So let's now talk about ore body knowledge. And ore body knowledge is really important, and it covers a number of aspects. When we talk about ore body knowledge, what we're literally saying is what the words say. We're gaining knowledge about the ore body that we intend to design and operate a mine in. So things that are really important to understand for ore body knowledge is the geology, the geotechnical things, which I'll explain a little bit more in a moment, structural geology, water, how much groundwater is within the rock mass, geometallurgy, so understanding the metallurgy, because we need to understand how the processing is going to go and what sort of recoveries we are going to get. The heat in the rock mass, some of the deeper mines have up to 85 degrees Celsius these days, so it's very important we understand the heat, because that guides how much air and refrigeration we will potentially need. And another important thing is understanding the stress within the rock mass, because that is a very important issue that we need to design for, firstly, and then manage when we operate a cave. Somebody said to me, what's the most important out of all those things? My answer would be, well, look, they're equally important, because you can't build and design a mine without understanding all of those elements. So what I want to go into now is just provide a little more insight into using a couple of examples about what we mean by ore body knowledge, just taking a few examples from the list that I said before. So what we're looking at here in the top right-hand side, caving project, which is under study currently. And the colours on that figure represent the sort of structural zones that have been identified from from drilling initially. And what you can see there is there's a lot of colors in there, and there's a lot of different directions on the figure. And that's an indication of what's typical in most deposits these days is the geological and structural complexity. And we need to understand that in an early stage to help inform our design process in particular. If we go down to the bottom of the page, we can see another aspect of ore body knowledge, and this is really looking at the deposit in a finer level of detail than the previous figure above. And we're now looking at things on the page like the mineralogy, so what sort of, maybe in the instance of Oyu-Tolgoi, the copper, different types of copper mineralogy. We're also looking at the fabric of the rock mass to understand what makes up that fabric and how strong or weak it is potentially. So these are all the sorts of things that we really need to understand to help us design and make a sustainable cave, and something which Oyu-Tolgoi has had a long journey on. So if we talk about geotechnical drilling, let's just explore that for a moment. So what we can see is on the right-hand side a very good illustration of just what it takes to gain adequate geotechnical knowledge. And you can see a deposit here, an example of an underground deposit below surface, that initially and each of those traces on the pages is effectively a diamond drill hole. And you can see initially we would be drilling a vast number of holes from surface. And then eventually when we get some form of underground access, we can see that we have underground holes there as well. And there's thousands of, sometimes hundreds of thousands of meters of drilling that takes place depending on the size of the deposit to source that knowledge. A lot of time and a lot of money. The sort of things in the bullets are illustrating what we need to gain from that geotechnical drilling. So some of them were mentioned before. The rock strength, how strong or weak is rock mass, is really important to understand for caving, because if it's really strong, it may not cave easily. If it's really weak, it will obviously cave very easily, but that presents some other challenges that we need to manage. Fracture frequency is really, really important in caving, because that dictates a number of things. It goes back to the strength of the rock and the fragmentation within it, what size it will break up as it starts to cave. Stress is a big one. Mines are getting deeper these days. Most of the new caves, which I'll share with you a bit later on, are in excess of 1,000 meters below surface. And with that, the stresses can get quite high, and that means that we need to be careful how we operate the mine, and also how we design it with ground support in particular. The figure at the bottom of the slide is illustrating the core, and here we can see that this is an example of what we'd pull out from one of those holes in the figure above. Only difference here is this core, the circle of core, has been cut in half, but we can see in that core the sort of illustration of fractures within that, and this goes back to the fracture frequency in one of the bullets there this is sort of information we need to gather. Now, along with geotechnical, structural geology is a really important aspect that we need to understand, and the sooner we can understand it, the better. And the figures here really illustrate what structural geology looks like. So essentially all the lines and all the colors in the various slides here are indicating some form of structure in the rock mass. And that structure could be a dike, sort of an intrusion, or it could be a fault, or it could be a major joint or a fracture, something that's not just a small fracture, but more of substance, and definitely does have or will have an impact on how we set up the mine. And that's illustrated in the bullets there, where we can see that there's a number of things that are really critical for when we design and build a mine that can be influenced negatively by structural geology, and why we need to put a lot of time and effort into upfront understanding that structural geology, such that we can address all those sorts of things. You know, the way we set up our footprint in terms of the orientation related to the structures, because there are good ways that we can intersect the structures, and there are bad ways that we can intersect the structures. Seismic risk, as the mines are getting deeper these days, structural geology can have a negative impact on seismic risk. So another good reason why we need to understand it well. So while we saw on the previous slide a lot of good examples of structural geology, the bottom line is it's easy to miss that. Unless we drill every square inch of the deposit to find out exactly what's going on in the whole rock mass, then there will be gaps in our knowledge. And this is very clearly illustrated in work that was done from Cadia here. So this is a paper that Cadia, which is a block cave operation in Australia, they shared. And what you're looking at here in the figure is within that red ellipse, you'll see there's a line of dots there. And each of those dots represents a seismic activity. So there was some sort of small seismic event which was picked up by the seismic monitoring system. And you can see they're all in quite a nice straight line. So when the engineers look at that, that's indicating there's some form of structure there. And when they went and did some drilling, after they'd identified it through the seismic activity, they found there was a dike there. Now, again, on the previous slide, we saw a lot of examples of structures within essentially the footprint area where we've got the active mine. This one here is outside of the footprint, but also very important that we know where they are, because those sorts of things, if we're not careful, can generate unwanted seismic events. So we need to keep on looking for structural geology items as we initiate the mine, and we really do this with the benefit of a seismic monitoring system to help us identify these. So when we're building a block cave or a panel cave, construction quality is a really big issue. And when I talk about construction needing to be to a civil standard, the biggest thing you can think about is if you travel around the world and you go into an underground metro system, say, or underground tunnels, I think we'd all agree those are done to a very, very high standard. The support you see is very good, because these have got a lot of people and vehicles sort of running through them for many, many years, and they have to stand up for a long time. And caving is exactly the same. So it is not uncommon to have the sort of tunnels that you're seeing here, particularly the one in the top, standing up for at least 2, if not more, decades. As you'll hear later on from another presentation that a colleague will do, Chip, he'll tell you that the mine that he's worked at has been in operation for 40 odd years, and some of those tunnels have stood up for 40 years. Similarly, the mine I first started my caving career in at Palabora in South Africa, the tunnels are over 20 years old now. So it's very important that we construct them to a high standard, as we're seeing here. So a nice straight tunnel, a very good ground support around the sidewalls, a nice concrete road for efficient haulage of the ore. takes a lot of time and money, and it's very different to the way that we do things in a smaller scale underground mine, where they don't put as much time and effort, or they don't have to, because the mining is very short term. They're there in a tunnel for maybe 1 or 2 months, and then they close it and never have to go back in there again. With the caving, we're in there every day for many, many years. So one of the important things when we talk about the construction quality is the ground support. And here we see a number of illustrations in terms of the ground support requirements. The most important thing to understand is when we are assessing what sort of ground support we need, it's really based on the rock quality assessment. And this comes back to the point I talked about earlier on about the ore body knowledge. We really need to understand that well across all of those sorts of rock mass quality aspects. The top two figures really illustrate the type of support that we have to put in, and that's very important in terms of an example like Oyu Tolgoi, because it's a deeper mine and it's going to be subject to stresses over its mine life, and it's a large volume that we're extracting. So we need to be very diligent about the level of ground support that we design and install, and then monitor over the life of the cave. Ideally, we want our tunnels to look like the bottom right-hand figure there, which you can see it's a very nice tunnel, well supported. This is a tunnel from a sister caving operation, so you can see that there are no breakaways or there's no tunnels developed off it yet. So that's a good example of the ground support that we really want to and need to install. The figure on the left-hand side is illustrating what happens if we don't put in adequate ground support. So you can see here there's been some form of ground failure there, which has resulted in the failure of the sidewall and part of the roof there. So again, going back to the ore body knowledge that we gained earlier and the design work we do, all of that work is really put in place to get a tunnel that looks like the right-hand side and not like the left-hand side. Let's talk about caving hazards now. And I want to illustrate the caving hazards in the next 2 slides. So like anything in life, there are hazards, whether we're driving down the road or walking across the street, climbing stairs, there's hazards in everything we do. And it's really about how we understand those hazards and how we manage them. And there's 2 hazards in particular that we deal with in caving. And one of them is air gap, which I'll explain in a moment, and the other one is mud rush. So when we talk about, and I called it an air gap, but it's an air blast is the correct term. So an air blast is formed by what we call an air gap. And you can see that best illustrated here on the right-hand side, where we've got the profile section through the cave, and we can see from the extraction level at the bottom, the broken rock, and then the black large air gap, as it's called there, and then the top of the cave proceeding up towards surface. Now, an air gap can come about when our cave doesn't cave as quickly as we think it will, and we're pulling out the broken rock faster than what the cave will cave. And this means that then we get what we call an air gap happening. Now, in a normal cave, we strive to keep that air gap very small, because if something happens, we only want the rock to fall. So you can see in this figure here, that air gap looks quite large. It's maybe, well over 100 meters on the scale of that figure there. In the ideal world, we look to keep that very, very small. 5 or 10 meters. That may differ in caves. Every cave is unique and different, and depending on the setting, we may be able to let it go larger ultimately, but when we're initiating a cave, we need that gap to be very small so that there's no risk of a large collapse with potentially negative safety issues. So the way that we control that is we have monitoring tools, and I'll illustrate them shortly. We have a number of monitoring tools in and around the cave that gives us feedback on what's happening, particularly when we start the propagation for a cave, and help inform us about how quickly the cave is growing and how much rock we should pull out of that, so that we really use all that information to make sure that we don't put ourselves at risk of having a large air gap if you got here. The illustration at the bottom left is something that happened about 20 years ago to North Parkes mine, where it really illustrates an air gap situation they had in a much smaller operation than what you're looking at OT. So we have a look at the other hazard to share, and that's mud rushes. So mud rushes can occur when effectively you mix rock with moisture, water. And the figures in here, particularly the photos you're looking at, illustrate the sort of things that can occur underground, typically coming out of a draw point, where one way or another the rock mass liquefies, and typically it's when the rock is weaker and finer fragmentation, smaller particles, and you got water, which then make it liquefy, and then it becomes, it wants to run away on this, doesn't sit so well. And you can see that in the cartoons at the bottom. Effectively, you've got the caved rock mass, you've got some form of rainfall or flooding happening one way or another, water gets into that rock mass, and then that liquefied rock mass can potentially get into a draw point and run out, as the photos above illustrate. So it's really important that where we do have that water hazard and the finer rock, that we have adequate safety protocols in place to monitor that. And often we'll use mines that really have to manage this on an ongoing basis. Some of them where they have very high rainfall, up to 6 to 10 meters a year. They use things like remote loading, so they don't put people in harm's way to remotely muck the rock out. So I talked about monitoring tools before, and this is one of the things that the mining industry, particularly caving, has really advanced over the last 15 years. When I started my caving career over 20 years ago, we had none of these tools, except for the picture with the blue dots down the bottom, which I'll talk about shortly. But we had no active monitoring tools that could tell us exactly what was happening in the rock mass over time and in real time. That's all changed in recent years, and the figures at the top and down the right-hand side are illustrating the tools that we have to use in the caving operations these days, where we can effectively install them in the rock mass before we initiate the cave. And then these tools are actively sending us signals back to monitoring devices, and they tell us things like where the cave is propagating to vertically. And also we've got beacon systems which are within the broken rock mass itself. And every 2 or 3 days, those beacons activate and read to detectors, such that we can develop over time traces of those beacons moving through the rock mass. And that's really, really important for us to understand what goes on within a caving rock mass. All those tools are complemented by a seismic monitoring system, which is illustrated, and this is a real example from Palabora over a 3-month period, where you can see all those coloured dots representing individual seismic events that took place. And all the mines use this. There are a lot of seismic monitoring systems. Almost every mine these days has them because they're getting deeper. And those seismic events are really informative for us when we're initiating a cave, because they tell us how we want to see that. That's a good thing, to see all that seismic activity. And that's telling us that our cave is stressing and it's starting to propagate up towards surface. They also help us understand what's going on outside of the caving volume, which was illustrated by that previous slide from the Cater example I gave you. So in finishing up, what I'd like to share with you is, just looking back on my caving life, a few thoughts. I think you would have clearly got the picture that there's a lot going on within the cave, and hence there's a lot of complexity for it. I particularly enjoyed that, along with working with the people within the caving community. I'd argue that out of all the mining methods around the world, caving, just because of the complexity and the quality of people it attracts, has been one of the things that I've been really privileged to be involved with and work amongst those people and within those operations. The new projects these days are becoming deeper, and with that more challenging. And this makes it interesting as we go forward to design, build and operate mines. There are a lot of learnings as we move through that cycle of design to construction and to operation. And you can see here there will be a loop, because with the best design, we still don't know exactly what happens within the rock mass, which means that we get into making holes in it through the construction and development. We then will loop back and adjust some of our design aspects. So there is a bit of an iterative loop between the design and construction in particular. One of the things to help us on that journey is that we have a lot of peer caves out there now. There are 6 caving projects on the go right now globally, 2 in Indonesia, 2 in Chile, 1 in Australia, and 1 in South Africa. And these are all active new caving projects under development. And that's a huge benefit for the likes of OT, because there are learning lessons out of each of those caving projects that can be shared, and they are shared. The caving community is very small globally. Everybody talks to each other, and there is a good network to share lessons. So that's something that we never had when we started Palabora. We were the deepest cave in the world at that time, but we had no peer to learn from. That is completely different now, and O2, by way of example, has six peers they can learn from. At the end of the day, each rock mass is unique, and we have to work with that, but learn as best we can from others and use those lessons for our rock mass. As I said in the previous slide, another huge advantage we have these days compared to 15, 20 years ago is the level of technology, and that is going to help us even more as we go through and develop the caves, because that technology is advancing by the year. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Simon, very much. And it has been very interesting presentation, especially the last slide you shared with us. So, Simon, can you stop sharing your screen? Cool, thank you. Here, Simon, please be there. I have one question for you. It looks like this question is out of curiosity from one of our attendees. So we all know that there is microseismic activities at that site level, if we pinpoint that site. But the question is about whether there was observation about the regional level increase of seismic activities observed or not because of those caving at site.
Yes, there's obviously micro-seismic activity that happens within the direct cave volume, and that's a good thing, as we saw with that figure I had from Palabora, where it illustrates that the cave is actually propagating and moving up to surface, which is what we want to hear, what we want to see. But in terms of regional seismicity, which is the question outside of the direct caving volume, yes, there are examples of that. And that is generated by what happens when we have a large caving volume, such as any of the large caves these days. We are now severely interrupting the harmony of the earth. And when we do that, when we take out a volume of rock, we can cause the surrounding rock mass, the regional rock mass, to change and relax. And we can get what we call strike slip fault events, and these can trigger more regional style seismic events. And this is why I illustrated with that slide with the example from Cadia, the one that identified the structural geology outside of the caving volume, a good example of why it's important that when we initiate the cave that we still keep monitoring the rock mass, the regional volume outside, to identify any of those sorts of other features which could trigger a strike slip fault release and give us a bigger seismic event. So the industry has become much more aware of that over the recent years, and I think we're working to manage that within the caving industry. There's a good awareness of it now.
But however, it is not that level. You sleeping 200 or 500 kilometers away from a block cave mine, but at night you have to go out of your bed because of that underground mine induced earthquake.
No, it's very, when we talk about regional, it's very the English word is proximate. It's close by. You'll find it's sort of just more around the cave, not within the direct volume that we're mining, but surrounding it, which is, it would maybe be 1 kilometer away at the most, but not typically more than that.
Okay, thank you. So
probably more like 500 meters or less.
Okay, so in UB we do not need to worry about this OT-induced earthquake, right?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. Thank you, Simon. Now I'm switching to Mongolian and just wrapping up some of your messages. Илтгэгч Саймоны одоо илтгэлийг сонслоо. За эндээс яг би ингээд нэг 5 мессежийг хэлэхэд ер нь уулуурхайг олборлолтыг их олон аргууд би байгаа боловч энэ дотор хамгийн их тийм олон хүчин зүйл нөлөөлдөг их төвөгтэй гэж хэлж болохоор ийм арга бол энэ блокер нурах арга гэдгийг хэлээд тийм учраас одоо уурхайг эхлүүлэх гэж байгаа анханасаа энэ уурхайг эхлүүлэхээс эхлээд ашиглаад баг одоо дуусах хүртэл их бүх алхмаа тооцоолж судалж технологи болон техникүүдээ за тэгээд төлөвлөгөөгөө гаргасны дараа энэ арга руу ордог болохоос биш зүгээр одоо энэ аргыг хэрэглээ явж яснаа нэг газар очиод нэг мухар нөхөд тулаад за ер нь энэ арга бүтэхгүй юм байна. Одоо жоохон аргаа өөрчлөе ингээд завсраас нь ингээд няцдаг юм уу эсвэл шийдвэрээ өөрчлөөд өөр арга руу шилжиж явждаг юм боломж байдаггүй юм шүү гэдэг энэ мессеж бол өөрөө үнэхээр ямар өндөр түвшний одоо шинжлэх ухаан болон одоо туршилт судалгаа мэдлэг шаардж явдаг арга вэ гэдгийг маш ойлгомжтой хэлсэн байна. Энэтэй холбоотой одоо энэ бидний хэлдгээр бол геологийн судалгаа. За мэргэжлийн одоо бос хүмүүс бол газрын дор хэдэн килограмм хэдэн тонн алт байгаа хэдэн мянган тонн ч юм уу сая тонн зис байгаа гэдгийг хайгуулаар одоо олж илрүүлдэг юм байна гэж ойлгодог бол манай сайн хэлтгэгчийн хэлж байгаагаар одоо газар дор асар том барилга байгууламж барьж асар том үйл ажиллагаа явуулахад шаардлагатай. Одоо газар дор байгаа чулуулгийн бүтэц, найрлага, шинж чанар, эвдрэл хагалаас өсвөлөд маш олон мэдээллүүдийг цуглуулж авч тэрэн дээр үндэслэн дүн шинжилгээ хийдэг учраас одоо ийм төрлийн аргаар ашиглах гэж байгаа ордуудын судалгаа ялангуяа энэ өрөмдөж мэдээлэл авдаг тэр судалгаанууд бол их нарийн байдаг шүү. Тэгэхээр маш ойлгомжтой гоё жишээ хэллээ. За бас нэг зүйл мэдээж ингээд судалгаан дээр үндэслэл хийж байгаа боловч одоо эрсдлүүд байдгийн одоо хоёр жишээг дээр нураагаад явж байгаа яг одоо хөндлөлөд агуу үүсгэж байгаа хэсэг дээр хоосон орон зай байж идэг. Тэн дээр одоо огцом дээрээс нь нуралт явагдсан тохиолдолд тэд байгаа анхаар нь огцом шахагдсанаас болж агаарын цогцлтын долгион үүсдэг. Энэ нь бол тэр газар дорх одоо ажлыг бол одоо сүйтгэдэг ийм том эрсдлийн талаар дурдлаа. Нөгөөх нь тэр шавар нь одоо шавар цутгаж орж ирж байгаа одоо air gap гэж хэлээд байна. За энэтэй холбоотой энэ бол одоо мэдээж тэр нураалт явагдаж байхад бид нар төсөөлөхдөө за чулуу болгоно нэг хаашаа 10 см хэмжээтэй ботлогдож бууж ирэх нэ гэж тооцож байхад зарим газар нь бүр хит гурил шиг нутаглагдаад тэрэн дээрээс одоо орж ирсэн борооны ус байна уу завсарт байгаа анц цовдгоо устай нийлээд доошо огцом одоо үерлэж юм шавран үер бууж ирэх ийм аюул байдаг талаар гэх мэтлэн ингээд яг энэ аргатай холбоотой онцлогтой холбоотой байдаг энэ том эрсдлүүд энэ талаар дурдаад гэхдээ эдгээрээс бол бид нарт айх юм байхгүй одоо Саймны практик одоо карьерийн одоо сүүлийн 20 жил гэтэл энэ мониторинг буюу одоо энэ тэнд мэдрэх хэрэгслүүдийг газрын дор тавьж байгаа болох гэж байгаа мэдээллүүдийг авдаг. Энэ технологи бол асар хүчтэй хөгжиж байгаа талаар хэллээ. За ингээд энэ бүхэн маань бол одоо судалгааны болон одоо шийдлийн хувьд бидний энэ блок буюу нураалтай энэ далдуухан технологи дээр анхаарах зүйлсийн талаар одоо маш сайхан юм баатсан. Тэгээд ер нь тэр сүүлийн слайд бол надад үнэхээр таалагдж байна тий одоо насаараа энэ технологийн чиглэлээр ажилласан хүний хувьд ийм технологиг хэрэглэхэд одоо эрхийн урууны дүрм гэж хэлэх юм бол одоо хэлж болох хэдэн зүйлсийг бацаад ингээ хэлж байна. За энэ дотор бол одоо надад ч гэсэн 2005-6 оноос хойш ажиглагдаад байгаа зүйл бол үнэхээр яг энэ нураалтын энэ технологи дээр энэ барьерийн төрлийн том ордуудыг ашигладаг энэ технологиг эзэмшээд арга туршлага хуваалцаа явж идэг өндөр мэргэжлийн хүмүүс бол одоо үнэхээр бие бинийгээ одоо нэг манайхаар бол одоо нэг голын улс шиг ингээ мэдчихийдэг. Тийм ч учраас энэ их олон комплекс мэдээллүүдтэй хоорондоо харилцан солилцож байж тэрний үндсэн дээр өөрсдийнхөө энэ технологийн талаарх мэдлэгээ хариуцуулаад технологио сайжруулад судалгааны шинэ арга барилуудаа бий болгоход тэрийг харилцан хуваалцсан явж байгаа тухай хэллээ. За бид одоо өнөөдрийн хурлаас эхлээд ер нь бид бол цаашдаа энэ мэргэжлийн хурлуудыг жил болгон Монголд зохион байгуулах чиглэлээр эрэл хайгуулыг хийж байгаа. Тэгэхээр энд бол одоо манай Монголоос их олон мэргэжилтийн инженерүүд энэ блок кевийн одоо community гэж хэлээд байгаа. Энэ нэг голынхан гэр бүлд ороод өндөр түвшинд бас ингээд туршлага олцоод явах хүмүүс одоо манай улсаас төрөхөд бол цаг хугацаа холгүй байна гэж би хэлмээр байна. За зохион байгуулалттай холбоотой нэг зүйл хэлье. Бид ингээд гадны мэрэгчлэтнүүдээр ийм ялангуяа их мэрэгжлийн өндөр түвшний тэгээд их тийм мэрэгжлийн үг хэллэг бүхий презентацуудыг сонсоход яг төрлөх хэлээр нь тэгээд танилцуулгыг англи хэл дээр нь явуулвал илүү мэрэгжлийн хүмүүст ойлгомжтой байдаг. Та бүхэн бид нар бүгд өөрсдөө мэдж байна те одоо манай улсад энэ мэрэгжлийн салбарын нэр томьёо ойлголтуудаа зэгцлэхэд байнга ажиллаа явж байгаа хүмүүсийн хувьд их хэл дээр нь юмнуудыг сонсчоод дараа нь одоо дотоод хэлцүүлгүүд өрнүүлэх хэрэгтэй байдаг. Тэр утгаар нь бид нар бол энэ үндсэн хурлаа ингээд шууд явж байгаа. Гэхдээ бид одоо салбарын ахмадуудаас эхлээд маш олон хүмүүсийг энд урьж оролцуулахдаа шууд явж байгаа үед нь бас орчуулгатай яваасаа гэж бодоод орчуулгатай ийм туслаа өрөө гаргаад орчуулагч ажиллуулж байгаа. Манай Монгол улсад энэ синхрон орчуулгыг хийдэг цөөхөн ийм өндөр түвшний мэргэжилтнүүдийн нэгийг бид ураад энд ажиллуулж байгаа. Гэхдээ би зүгээр юу гэж бодож байна уу гэхээр хэдийгээр одоо жишээл намайг синхрон орчуулгыг би үндэж чадахгүй. Тэр бол өөр мэргэжил. Гэхдээ тэр хүмүүс бол манай энэ мэргэжлийн ялангуяа энэ Монголд нэвтэрч эхэлж байгаа технологийн төлөвлөгөөнийг орчуулахад бол маш их хүндрэлтэй тулж байгаа гэж би ойлгож байна. Тийм учраас ямар ч хэсэн энэ удаад та бүхэн ингээд шууд явж байгаа манай хурлын орчуулгаар нь сонсоод авчаарай. Дараа нь бид энэ онлайн платформын давуу тал маань болохоор бичигдээд үлдчихэж байгаа. Тэр бичлэг дээрээ бид нар шууд саяны жишээлхэд Саймоны өмнөх ферингийн презентацууд дээр бид мэдээ мэргэжлийн хүмүүс за мөн манай энэ оюутлогод бас энэ чиглэлийн мэргэжилтнүүд залуучууд байгаа. Биднээс харж байгаад болцоотой хүмүүс нь энэ яриагийн хадаад орчуулад өгчин. Тэгэнгүүт нь манай техникийн залуучууд тэр бичлэгэн дээр нь бидний орчуулсныг хадмал орчуулга сабтайтл болгоод өгчин. За тэгэхээр одоо тийм мэргэжлийн Монгол бичгийн юм хадмал орчуулгатайгаар хүлээж авч дахиж энэ бичлэгийг сонсож илүү нарийн одоо ойлголтоо баттгахыг гэж хүссэн ийм хүмүүс байвал та бүхэн энэ UG symposium-ит must do email гэдэг бидний танартай харилцах зорилгоор шүтээстэр нээсэн имэйл хаяг байгаа. Тэрлүүд та бүхэн имэйл бичээд дараа энэ сабтайтлтай бичлэгийг бид нар үзэх сонирхолтой байна шүү гэдгээ илэрхийлж яриа. Тэгээ бид энэ хурлын дараа ярьж байгаад мэдээж хурлын дараа шууд бэлэн болгож чадахгүй бид нарт энэ дээр ажиллах хугацаа хэрэгтэй. Тэгээд тодорхой хугацааны дараа бид нар энийг бэлэн болгохоор та бүхэнтэй хуваалцснаа. Өөр нэг асуулт байгаа нь мөн энийг одоо дахиж сонсох үзэх сонирхолтой. Гэхдээ англи дээр нь яг шууд энэ манай элтгэгч нарын яриатай сонсохыг хүсэж байгаа хүмүүс бас байх шиг байна. Энэ чатаар бас над руу ганц нэг хүмүүс гэж асуугаад байна. Тэгэхээр тэр хүмүүст ч гэсэн дараа нь энийг буцаагаад тоглуулад үзэх боломжийг бид нар олгоноо. За ингээд хөтөлбөрийн дагуу дараагийнхаа илтгэлийг сонсъё. Энэ далдуурхайд геотехникийн өвдөл цуглуулахын ач холбогдол энэ талаар манай шүтээсийн геолог болгосон сургуулийн дэд профессор доктор Ганзөрг илтгэл тавина. Манай Ганзөрг докторийн хувьд бол одоо нэг зүйлийг онцолж хэлэхэд ялангуяа энэ оюутлогоо ирээд тэмдэгтэй хамтарч ажиллаад Монгол улсад манай шүтээсийн болгосон сургууль дээр геотехникийн мэргэжлийг энэ дэлхийн түвшинд гаргаж ирэхэд маш их олон жилийн хөдөлмөр сэтгэлээ зориулж явж байгаа. За тэгээд ирээд тэмдэгтийн дэмжлэгтэйгээр сүүлийн одоо 1 жилийн хугацаанд энэ ажил нь маш урагштай явж байгааг та бүхэнд дуулгах таатай байна. Ингээд Ганзөрг доктор та илтгэлээ танилцуулнаа.